Thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Gigaba, you are at the center of Gupta naturalization, granting them of passports and ID numbers. But before we go there, let's start with you. There are allegations that you are not, your citizenship is questionable. So can you respond to this question? Where were you born and where was your father born?
Honorable Member, I find your question quite peculiar, extremely peculiar, offensive to my family, offensive to my father who is late, offensive to my mother, offensive to my father who was born at Dlamini, Mbonela, where my clan has lived for hundreds of years, where if you go now, you will find members of my clan living on the lands that the fathers of our fathers have lived, lands which they left us, our home where the spirits of my grandfathers still live. It's an offense to my mother who was born as Ngolweni among the Dlaminis, where the families of her parents have lived for centuries. It's an offense to all of us. It's an offense to my identity. Now, having said all of that, because I think it behoves all of us as honorable members not to attack each other's identities for political point scoring and for cheap gain. If I attack your identity, you would be as offended as I am. So if you want to know my identity, I invite you to go to Ngabeni, Mbonela. Speak to members of my family. They will tell you who I am. You don't even have to be told by me. They will tell you who I am. They will tell you why my name is Nkanyezi and where does it come from. Who is Nkanyezi among my family members? Having said all of that, I'm sure you will respect my right to respond to you as you asked your question. Having said all of that, you then, and I know what you are trying to do is to irritate me, and you will not succeed. The naturalization of the
I'm still going to that one. I just wanted to deal with where you were born and where your father was born. I'm going to the Guptas. I'm not there, so don't rush. Don't rush. So I'm still going to ask that question.
Honorable Dlamini.
No, but my question was very simple, Chairperson. I said, where was he born? Where was his father born? I have not asked about the Guptas, so he must not go there. Relax, we're still going there.
No, I think it arises from the comment you raised earlier on, although it was not a question. If you say it wasn't a question, but you made a comment that related to that.
Then you must respond to questions. That's why I said my question to you. I was very clear.
But if the witness feels that the comment needs a reply, I don't think we should prevent them from.
No problem. Let him reply to comments.
Yeah. Minister, the witness can go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Now, having raised the issue of the Gupta citizenship, I will deal with it in the comprehensive detail, because the honorable member makes an inaccurate assertion that I'm at the center of the naturalization of the Gupta family members. There are 62 Gupta people in South Africa with the Gupta family. Of those 62 people, there are 39 who hold permanent residence permits. There are 13 who hold naturalization, 9 of whom were naturalized between 2002 and 2006. and only 4 who were naturalized in 2015. And there are 10 children that were born in South Africa. So of those 9 that were naturalized between 2002 and 2006, when I was not Minister of Home Affairs, surely the honorable member would be well advised that that being the majority, including those who got permanent residence permits prior to my appointment as Minister of Home Affairs, that doesn't place me at the center of the naturalization of the Gupta family members. That's one. Number 2, the honorable member, the 4 that were naturalized in 2015, there were valid reasons why the department advised that we should do so. And the letter of the law was followed to the full extent, including at the end of the process, they being asked to renounce Indian citizenship. And one of the 5 applicants in 2015 refusing to renounce Indian citizenship, and therefore he remains not a South African. The 4 that were naturalized complied upon appeal. They had started applying for South African citizenship in 2013 when I was not Minister of Home Affairs. Their application was rejected in 2014. They appealed in 2015, and the department established a panel, as the Director General has indicated, in terms of which their citizenship application was. If there was a malicious intent to grant them South African citizenship, regardless of what South African law stipulated, they would not have been asked at the end of the process to state, to renounce Indian citizenship, and upon one member refusing to renounce it and was not granted South African citizenship and is not a South African citizen as we speak today, that member would have gone on to be granted South African citizenship regardless of what the law says. But that is not the case. It was not the case, which means that we followed the letter of the law to its full extent and did nothing outside it. The honorable member then says we granted them South African passports, and I'm sure he is referring to a passport which was circulating on social media relating to 2015. The said member, the said person to whom the honorable member is referring, was granted his first passport. Now, a passport is a document you get. Now, there are 2 conditions to a passport.
Hold on, Minister.
Yeah. No. I want the minister is saying I'm referring to a member. He can just say the name of that person that I'm referring to.
Okay.
The person that the honorable member is referring to, I was still explaining a passport. A passport can expire after 10 years, or once its pages get full, you then have to change it. So a person, if you look at my passport, which was issued in 2017 when I became, let's take my official passport, my diplomatic passport, which was issued in 2017 when I became Minister of Finance, it will not be the first diplomatic passport I have held in my life. The first diplomatic passport issued to me was issued in 2004 when I became Deputy Minister of Home Affairs. When I became Minister of Public Enterprises, I was issued with a new diplomatic passport, and so on and so on. So the person that the honorable member is referring to was issued his first passport in 2012 when I was not Minister of Home Affairs. So it was not the first time in 2015 that this person got a South African passport. The first passport he received was in 2012, and in that year I was not Minister of Home Affairs, and by law, because he had been naturalized in 2002, prior to me even being an MP, it means this person already qualified to hold a South African passport. Thank you.
You are saying that when I ask questions, you get offended. Let me tell you now, I don't care about that. You can get offended as much as you want. I'm going to ask you questions and you're going to provide answers. So that doesn't bother me. Now, I've never spoken about any member of the Gupta family, but you've decided to do that. Now, let me ask you a question. Atul Kumar Gupta, does he have South African citizenship?
Well, the honorable member, much as he feels he doesn't care about whether I'm offended or not, neither do I care, honorable member, whether you try to offend me or not. So it's okay. It's a draw. You did ask, you expressly asked, you said I'm at the center of the naturalization of the Gupta family. So you can contradict yourself now if you choose so, if it's convenient. But that being the case, yes, Atul Kumar Gupta is a South African citizen, naturalized in 2002. He was naturalized in 2002 when I was not even a member of parliament.
Rajesh Tony Gupta?
Rajesh Tony Gupta was naturalized, I think, in 2006.
AJ Gupta?
AJ Gupta is not a naturalized South African citizen. He holds a permanent residence permit only because he refused to renounce Indian citizenship, and therefore he's not a South African citizen.
Does AJ Gupta have a South African passport?
I don't know. I will have to check that. But holders of permanent residence permits are not issued with South African passport documents.
The press conference that you did dealing with the same issue of Gupta naturalization, there's a guy, his name is Malusi Chwete, apparently he's your spokesperson. He's saying you conducted that interview at your personal capacity. Oh, sorry, the press briefing at your personal capacity. Is that correct?
He was inaccurately quoted. He did not make any such claims because the media briefing was organized immediately after we went to brief the Home Affairs Portfolio Committee on the quarterly reports of the department, GPW, and the IEC. Prior to the presentation of those quarterly reports, the chairperson advised that the committee should ask me questions around this issue, to which I responded, and there was a media briefing afterwards, at which, as I indicated subsequently, I erroneously made reference to Mr. Atul. I erroneously referred to Mr. Atul Gupta as not a South African citizen. I corrected that immediately that afternoon, and the following day I issued the statement because I had been advised by one of the officials to that effect, and I made mention of the fact without verifying with the Director General. And Mr. Malusi Chwete has subsequently reported the matter to the press ombudsman that he was being misrepresented.
You mentioned when I spoke about issues relating to your family, you got offended. We dealt with that issue. And you would understand that part of what we're dealing with the state capture, It's got a lot to do with the influence of politicians, family members getting involved in the procurement and given tenders, boyfriends, stepdaughters, everything. We've been on this committee. We've been given that information that this boyfriend, girlfriend, stepdaughter, everything. So the families are not immune to the issue that we are dealing with. Your wife, on the ENC interview, she said she helped with the IT system of Home Affairs as well as processing of passport. Is that correct? Is that how we operate?
It's not true. My wife at that interview was being asked about her own background, her own work. My wife has never, does not, will never, would never even interface with the work of any department at which I am deployed. Where she was working before, if there were matters that related to that company bidding for contracts at the Department of Home Affairs, she was never involved, and she has since stopped working for that company. But my wife has never, does not, will never, would never be involved in the internal affairs of the department in which I am working.
The Fireblade approval, it went to court. I tried to follow your explanation. It went to court on the basis of the minutes of a meeting that you gave them the approval. And then it went to court various times up until the last judgment of the Constitutional Court. Can you give us that explanation again? Because the Constitutional Court has given a judgment on the appeal that you've made that, actually they've dismissed the appeal, to confirm that the minutes of that meeting were accurate.
Again, the honorable member is probably hasn't read what the Constitutional Court ruled. The Constitutional Court ruling says, we are dismissing your direct appeal to us on the basis that it is not yet ripe to serve before the Constitutional Court because you yourself have appealed to the Supreme Court of Appeal to overturn the decision of October and December last year at the High Court. So it's not rejected on the basis that there is a minute somewhere. It's only because there is an appeal pending with the Supreme Court, and only after that appeal, should we wish to pursue the matter with the Constitutional Court, then we can go ahead and do so. Then the Constitutional Court would consider the matter ripe to serve before it. But the minute that is being referred to is a minute which, as I said earlier, emanated from one party to the meeting. The minutes of meetings with government are not taken by non-government officials, and therefore you cannot take that minute to be binding until we all have agreed that this minute, as is presented, we are prepared to sign on to it and have the matter resolved in that way. In this instance, we did not sign to any minute, and so it's a minute that only emanates from one of the parties, not both of them.
The removal of the ESCOM board members, you're saying you removed some of the board members and you left Barnard and Metlomakulu. The others, you removed them on the basis that they've served a long time within the board. So you felt that you must remove. Why did you retain Barnard and Metlomakulu? What was your reason?
It was to ensure continuity so that there is no gap between the new members and the old members. But secondly, if I'm not mistaken, they had not had the same duration on the board as the other members who were being removed.
You're saying you removed others because of the duration, the long duration. These two, is that the reason that because remember you're under oath, so we can't be sitting with assumptions. Is that the reason why you retain these two? And what does, maybe when you answer that, what does governance oversight on the overalls of SOEs says with the removal of the board members? Does it say to you, this one has served such a long time, we must remove them? Can you clarify that? What does it say?
The honorable member will remember that in my presentation, I referred to a number of policies and guidelines and legislation, including the King 3 and so on. Now, I said that there are conditions on which a member can and must serve on a board of a company, that when you have exceeded in many instances, when you have exceeded 2 terms, when you have served 2 terms on a board, depending on the MOI of a particular state-owned entity, you then have to be retired to allow for new appointments. I mean, you have to be rotated to allow for new appointments in order to regularly replenish the boards with new members. Once you have served longer than 9 years, it creates a problem in regard to your independence and your proximity to the company in which you are serving. That is why one of the rules that I established at DPE was that instead of 3 years, it should be, instead of 3 terms, it should be 2 terms, that no member should serve in any board for a period longer than 2 terms of 3 years each. And that is the reason why in the case of the report of the Independent Regulatory Board of Auditors last year, I supported it and signed to it because I was saying for any audit firm to have a contract that lasts up to 120 years, it undermines independence of audit firms, of independent auditors, the audit committees, and even financial directors. So in this regard of ESCOM, this was the main reason, and that is why I stated that we then took the decision to change the board to allow for new members to come in. Among others, I was dealing with a particular challenge at that time, that the chairman of the board had been for some time an executive chairman, and that created a problem of distance between the role of CEO and the role of CFO. Now, the problem that arises here, that the committee, I'm sure, in the near future is going to deal with, is that there has been no shareholder management legislation that guides how the shareholder should manage the state-owned companies. That bill is going to be brought before Parliament, hopefully during the course of this year, and it will allow Parliament to have an overarching legislation that guides the management of state-owned companies by the shareholder. At the present moment, you have a situation where the shareholders have got different shareholder departments, have got different shareholder guidelines and rules, different memoranda of incorporation, different shareholder compacts, and different ways of managing state-owned companies. The shareholder management legislation is going to put an end to all of that and ensure that there is common practice, best practice that can be followed right throughout the country in managing state-owned companies.
Page 15 of your statement, you are saying if people we appointed went to do wrong things later, we cannot be held accountable. What do you mean that the people that you appointed, when they do wrong things, we can't hold you accountable?
Because, as I kept on explaining, it was never an intention to appoint someone who is going to do something wrong, 1. 2, should any one of the people be found to have done anything wrong, they themselves should be held accountable for what they did wrong, because they would not have acted on the mandate of the of the cabinet when it approved their appointment, and on behalf of the minister when the minister appointed them.
You know, Mr. Gigaba, we are dealing with ESCOM issues here, with over 41,000 jobs at risk, on the basis of the appointments that were approved by ministers. So are you saying to us, are you saying to the nation that if you're a minister and you appoint people in the board that have collapsed, a state-owned entity, simply because you didn't know when you were appointing them, you must not be held accountable? Is that what you are saying?
Absolutely, because you would not have known that they were going to act in a particular way at a particular time. When you deal with hindsight, hindsight is what you know now, which you did not know back then when you took the decision. When new facts arise, that's what it's all about.
So you're saying those board members and the executives, they must just, only themselves who must be accountable, not the ministers. The ministers, they must be left alone, continue with their life as nothing happened. Is that what you're saying?
Because you deal with the person who did a wrong, not a person who appointed someone who did a wrong, when they did not know that that someone was going to do a wrong.
So we are happy with the ministers that have, under their own portfolios, they've got departments that have collapsed through their own appointments. I'm not talking of people that were appointed that when you are not a minister. So you are saying those ministers are doing a good job, let life continue. South Africans, let us be happy. Let Minister Gigaba, Minister Lynn Brown, and everyone continue with their job, because they appointed those people, and those people they've made to account, by the way. From the board chairpersons, they've been fired, the CEOs have been fired, but the ministers, it's all well and good.
You need to prove that a particular minister knew that a wrong was taking place and was complicit in the doing of the wrong.
So until it's not proven, as long as it has been proved by even removing the posts that you appointed, you are saying, not you, you are fine, life must go on. That's what I want to get from you.
I say anybody is presumed innocent until proven otherwise. The fact that someone appointed a board that eventually did something wrong does not necessarily make them liable. Of course they will come to answer. Of course they must be made to account. Of course they must answer for whether they knew, whether that was the purpose of the mandate which they gave to a particular board. And you must act on the basis of facts before you, not on the basis of what you wish to be the facts.
Okay, let me ask this question this way. A minister who presides over a department that has collapsed, that person you're saying must continue to be made a minister on other departments?
No, I'm not saying that. We are now talking about something different.
But you're saying they must not account. Accountability, it means accountability. Part of accountability, it means you can't be moved to another ministry. You were given a ministry and it collapsed. So do you say, in your own opinion, that minister, it's fine to be moved to another ministry? Because accountability, that's what it means. That even if it's not an issue of whether you find guilty or not, it's an issue that you presided over a department that has collapsed. Part of accountability, it means you can't be moved to another minister. So you are saying, no, it's fine, preside over a department that has been collapsed, because you are not found guilty of anything, it's fine to be moved to another ministry.
You must prove that the minister, remember, you must separate between the role of the minister as an executive authority and the role of the accounting office. You must prove that the minister directly contributed to the department collapsing. Once you prove that, you can then take that decision. But unless you have proven that, you can't arrive at that conclusion, because you are now acting on the basis of your wishes rather than on the basis of facts available before you.
Ministers of the ANC government. Mr. Iqbal Sharma, the cabinet rejected his appointment as chair Did they give you the reason why they rejected that appointment?
Among others, it was that he had recently been a government employee as a DDG and head of the Trade and Investment South Africa. That it was because I think he stepped down from that role in 2010, if I'm not mistaken, 2009 or 2010. And that because of that, it was too early to make him a chair of the Transnet board. And secondly, that Mr. Mkhwanazi had only been appointed for less than a year. And so it would not be appropriate and would not be read correctly if we then accepted his retirement from the board of Transnet. And Cabinet felt that the issues which seemed to be a concern with regard to him having been the CEO of Transnet and now being the chairman, and the challenge of separating the roles based on the experience, Cabinet felt that those issues could be resolved. And indeed, we went on to resolve those issues. And as we now know, Mr. Mkhwanazi served the board of Transnet until he was rotated, I think in 2014 or 2015. So those were the reasons. But Cabinet felt that because one of Mr. Sharma's experience at DTI, he needed to serve on the board or as a non-executive director of Transnet. And secondly, that because of the direction we were taking in terms of trying to establish some of our state-owned companies as national champions, that would play a leading role in investing in plant technology and skills, both in the country and offshore, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, that would play a catalyzing role in driving transformation and industrialization, and ensure that they influence their customers and suppliers to transform, to also invest in local sectors. Cabinet felt that he would be an important skill to have on the board that would bring that government perspective and the DTI perspective onto the program that we were setting for particularly Transnet, Dinel, Eskom, and some of those state-owned companies.
On page 17 of your statement, you're saying you were advised to replace Mr. Mkhwanazi by Mr. Iqbal Sharma. Who advised you?
As I kept saying throughout the document, the advice would come from the department based on submissions presented to me, the department having considered a number of facts before them. Sometimes I would agree with the advice, sometimes I would not agree, but I would trust the advice of the experts.
The appointment of Sharma as an NED, how did that come about? Who advised you on that one?
As I just said, Honorable Member, the advice would emanate from the department. They would have looked at a variety of skills required. They would do a skills audit, look at the variety of skills required, look at how those skills would assist us to balance between the corporate, commercial, as well as the developmental mandates of state-owned companies, and would select from the database available people who would possess the types of skill sets we required in order to meet those objectives.
Okay, maybe let me ask this question this way. The position of NED within the Transnet system, when did it become available?
It was available prior to my appointment, prior to even me becoming a minister. The board members are actually non-executive directors.
So there is no link that the board rejects Iqbal Sharma on being a chairperson and then he moves to be a non-executive director?
A chairperson of the board, Honorable Member, is a non-executive director. in all our state-owned companies, chairpersons of boards are non-executive directors. You do not get appointed first as chairperson of the board, then as a non-executive director. The process is otherwise. You get appointed as a non-executive director and then as a chairperson of the board. That is why Cabinet, in saying no, Mr. Sharma should not become the chairperson of the board, said, but we still support him as a non-executive director.
Mr. Molefe, as a CFO of ESCOM, instead of Mr. Sehole, again you were advised by the department that you must appoint Ms. Molefe. But also you are saying that Ms. Molefe's name appeared to be one of the top names that were recommended. How many other names were there and how many that were females?
There were, what the board would do is to submit 3 names which they recommend, from which the minister can choose, from whom the minister can choose. Now, ideally, the minister would choose the top candidate because that would be the preferred candidate of the board. But there could be very valid reasons why the preferred candidate is not suitable and the minister chooses the next suitable candidate to occupy the post that is being presented. In this instance, as I indicated extensively in my submission, there were valid reasons why Mr. Sehule would not have been suitable as a financial director at ESCOM, and there were valid reasons why Ms. Molefe became a suitable candidate as the financial director, and I think the facts of her suitability prove her out.
No, on the list, I'm asking you how many on the top list that were females? Was she the only one?
Was the only one.
You were mentioning that Mr. Sehole had an issue of working in a political environment. Did Ms. Molefe had no issue with that?
She had no issue with it because she was already working for ESCOM, which is a state-owned company whose shareholder is a political entity called government.
What were the specific reasons that Mr. Sehole outlined as his concerns working in a political environment?
I did not probe those reasons. I considered the submission presented before me and did not feel it was necessary for me to conduct another interview on top of the one that the board had already conducted.
Lastly, you're saying on your statement you were upset about the TNA New Age breakfast because of the huge amounts that were there. But you went to participate in the same TNA breakfast yourself. So you get upset and then tomorrow or the other day you go and participate. How did that happen? Because you're already upset about it.
I was upset about the contracts that were being entered into. But as I said, what created the dilemma for many state-owned companies and what made many ministers to participate in the TNA, in the SAPC TNA programs, was the fact that the public broadcaster was involved, and this provided an opportunity for government to outline its programs unmitigated for a substantial amount of time each morning.
Finally, you mentioned that you were invited to Gupta weddings, graduations, and everything. Did you go to the Gupta house in Saxonwold for either invitation or anything? Have you ever been to that house?
Final.
The Diwali celebrations the few Diwali celebrations that I attended were at the residence, and I went there, but there were few, as I say, and I subsequently stopped attending them, especially when I decided that I'm going to stop attending events where you are invited at people's residences, at people's private residences, because it does tend to create a public problem.
Thank you very much.